3 deadlines can all look urgent at 4:30, especially when every project has someone waiting for an answer. The visible problem is a crowded task list. The real cost is that the next hour gets assigned by pressure, not consequence. A low-value message steals the same attention as a client deliverable, and important work becomes invisible until it becomes expensive. The clarity matrix changes that operating state. It turns scattered tasks into a 4-cell map based on deadline heat and outcome leverage, then forces each priority to carry proof: what breaks, when it breaks, and what visible output moves it forward. The diagnostic question is simple enough to use under pressure: what breaks if this waits until the next planning window? The practical output is not a cleaner list. It is a ranked operating map that tells you what to execute, schedule, protect, or decline. Poor prioritization persists because most task lists preserve arrival order. The newest request sits beside the most consequential commitment, and the brain has to renegotiate the whole system every time it looks down. Sorting by deadline alone does not solve it, because some close deadlines carry little outcome value, while some quiet tasks prevent future damage. Sorting by importance alone also fails, because an important task with no near consequence can crowd out a real handoff due tomorrow. What you lose is not only time, you lose decision stability. Each interruption reopens the question of what matters, so attention leaks into rechecking, apologizing, and switching. The cause is not having too many tasks. The cause is giving every task the same shape before deciding what kind of decision it demands. The clarity matrix uses 2 axes, but the value comes from the evidence attached to each placement. Deadline. Heat asks how soon a missed action creates an observable consequence. Outcome leverage asks how much the task protects or advances a committed result. The 4 cells create 4 decisions. High heat and high leverage becomes the active lane. High leverage with lower heat becomes protected scheduling. High heat with low leverage becomes containment, delegation, or a brief response. Low heat and low leverage becomes parking or removal. The artifact has one more part: an evidence strip beside each active task. It captures the consequence date, the affected stakeholder or result, the next visible deliverable, and a learning mark after review. This applies to knowledge work with competing commitments. It does not replace emergency protocols, manager directives, or judgment calls, where the consequence is already defined by policy. The first operating rule is the consequence test. Before a task receives high deadline heat, name what breaks if it waits until the next planning window. A meeting reminder may feel urgent, but if delay only creates mild awkwardness, it is not the same as a draft blocking tomorrow's approval. This rule works because it separates interruption pressure from operational consequence. It fails when the situation has a predefined response path, such as a service outage or mandated escalation. Then the protocol takes over and the matrix waits. The decision that changes is whether you react now or contain the request. If the consequence is real, the task can move upward. If the consequence is only discomfort, it stays lower until it gains proof. Urgency becomes something observed, not something felt. The second rule is the deliverable gate. A task cannot enter the active lane unless the next visible output can be named. Not work on proposal, but send 2-page pricing draft. Not think about roadmap, but choose 3 features to remove from the release scope. This rule creates a useful friction. It slows planning for a few minutes so execution does not begin with ambiguity. The trade-off is that some familiar tasks will be demoted, not because they lack value, but because they are not yet actionable. The midpoint self-audit is direct. Inspect the active lane. If it has more than 3 tasks or any task lacks a consequence date, affected result, and visible deliverable, the board is mirroring anxiety. Rebuild it. This changes the decision from "what should I touch?" to what can produce inspectable progress now. A product operations lead is 9 days from a customer rollout. The task list includes training notes, bug triage, executive slides, release messaging, analytics cleanup, and a delayed legal review. The visible constraint is that the designer has 2 free afternoons and the executive review is locked for Friday. Using the clarity matrix, the legal review rises high because a delay blocks release approval. Executive slides rise too, but only after the next deliverable is defined as a 6-slide decision draft. Analytics cleanup has value, but no near consequence, so it moves into protected scheduling. The decision is to spend the first work block on the legal packet and reserve the designer's time for release messaging, not slide polish. The trade-off is visible: nicer internal reporting weights. The output is a 3-item active lane, a scheduled analytics block, and a learning mark predicting that legal dependencies create more heat than presentation polish. The third rule protects long-term leverage from being erased by small heat. Keep one protected block for a high-leverage task unless an active lane item would create a real breach before the next planning window. This is the framework's hardest trade-off. It means a fast reply may wait while a quiet strategic task gets defended. The rule works because leverage compounds only when it receives uninterrupted conversion time. Research into a decision, outline into a draft, draft into a shipped asset. It fails during a genuine breach window, when delaying the hot task damages a commitment more than the protected block can advance one. The decision that changes is not whether long-term work matters. It is which urgent-looking tasks are allowed to buy your protected time. Low-consequence urgency pays with delay. High-consequence urgency earns the block. An independent consultant is preparing a paid client audit while building a small workshop for future leads. On Monday morning, the client asks for a same-day formatting change, and the consultant also planned to outline the workshop. The matrix places the audit findings high leverage and high heat because delivery is due Wednesday and the client needs decisions from it. The formatting change has heat but low leverage, so the action is a 15-minute containment reply with one clean adjustment, not a full redesign. Then the workshop outline keeps a protected 90-minute block. The plan gets disrupted Tuesday when the client sends new data that changes 2 findings. The active lane is rebuilt. Revise findings, notify the client of the changed assumptions, and move the workshop block. In review, the learning mark notes that client data volatility should raise heat earlier next time. The takeaway is not that personal projects always lose. They lose only when new evidence changes consequence. The most common failure is urgent laundering. A task borrows heat from someone else's anxiety. Respond by asking the diagnostic question again and requiring the consequence to be named. The second failure is matrix hoarding, where every task gets placed, but nothing gets removed. The artifact becomes storage instead of a decision tool. Cut the low cell at the end of each cycle. The third failure is stale placement. A task that was low heat on Monday may become high heat after a dependency slips. Review the board when new evidence appears, not only when the calendar changes. The fourth failure is hiding vague work in high leverage. If no visible deliverable exists, send it back through the deliverable gate. The matrix cannot solve conflicting strategy, unclear authority, or impossible workload. It can only make those conflicts visible sooner. Return to the overloaded afternoon. 3 deadlines, multiple projects, and 1 hour that cannot serve everything. The operating change is now visible. Ask what breaks if this waits until the next planning window. Require each active task to name a consequence, an affected result, and a next deliverable. Keep the active lane to 3 items because capacity is part of the decision, not an afterthought. Protect 1 leverage block unless a real breach would occur before the next review. After the cycle, Compare what you predicted would break with what actually changed. Then update the next similar placement. That learning loop is what prevents the matrix from becoming a prettier list. The promised transformation is complete when the list no longer decides by volume or noise. It becomes a map of consequences, outputs, trade-offs, and the next action that deserves the hour.